to work it all out. Two middle-aged guys try to work it all out. Two middle-aged guys try to work it all out.
All right, everybody, welcome to Two Middle-Aged Guys Trying to Figure It Out. I'd love to hear that theme song. I can't really hear it. I'm going to pretend that this is like a radio show. We can hear the theme song. But I know that when everybody's listening to it, they get to hear it. Usher the show in. Chris, how you doing?
I'm doing great. You know, we can use it to usher the show in. We could do like some talk intro and then pause for a theme song. We've got some options.
We've got some options, yes. What do they call that in a TV show where they have a little vignette and then they do the theme song and then they go on and have the rest of the show?
Cold open is the term I've heard of it the most often,
yes.
Like the little Saturday Night Live sketch before they say live
It's
from New York.
Always Sunny in Philadelphia has that.
Yes.
It's very famous for that,
Yeah, that cold open, so...
Well, we'll have to work up to that. I don't know if we're ready for that sort of pressure.
No, I don't feel ready for it. No. I don't feel ready for anything.
Well, everyone, welcome to the podcast. This is we just got done recording this right after Easter. Did you have a good Easter weekend?
I had a lovely Easter weekend, yeah. We, in my church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we have a twice a year event called General Conference where we all gather together and the leadership of the church speaks. So our Easter weekend was 10 hours of church, which sounds like a lot, and it is a lot, but it's enjoyable. So
that's
how we spent it with family.
Was it here local?
It's broadcast out of Salt Lake, so
okay.
We pick it up on, believe it or not, we watch it on YouTube because that's the most reliable connection that we can get.
Absolutely.
But you can get it on satellite, you can get it through the church's website, all sorts of different things.
Right, so it's open to the public, right?
Oh,
Anybody
yeah.
can watch it. You don't have to do the secret
handshake. There's no handshake. There's no code that's sent out. It's free and open.
That's what they want you to think.
Well, that's what I'm telling you.
Have you watched it backwards?
No.
All right, well.
And I'll sync it up with Dark Side of the Moon. So.
There you go. Yes. Well, I guarantee it'd be more entertaining than Wizard of Oz.
Yes.
It's a boring old movie. Unpopular opinion.
I'm not a fan of it either. So we just lost subscribers right there. But
That's
anyway.
You know what I'm glad to know of is, though, you've seen Avatar, right?
I've seen the first one.
It's the first one, yeah. Everybody saw it. I think it was required. But if you remember the movie, there's some part where they land on the planet, I don't know, Pandora, I think is what it's called. And they said... the big military guy says, "We're not in Kansas anymore," or something like that. And I'm just glad to know 300 years in the future,
it still exists.
It's not just it doesn't exist. It's on the
it's
the height of pop culture and the tip of the tongue, exactly. So
well, the other thing he was like, I don't even remember the context, but I remember that same military guy, and he's like, their eyes were like juju beads.
Juju beads, yes.
And the jujube factory is still up and running.
Well, yeah, I didn't even know it was up and running now. I mean, maybe the jujube resurgence.
Yes.
I'm looking forward to that. Just before we crack light speed,
we're gonna get that.
Then they'll eat your eyes like jujubes.
It's terrifying.
Talk like a 1930s gangster. See?
But you know who that actor is?
That's Stephen Lang.
Stephen Lang,
yes,
who played in Tombstone. His character name is escaping me, but he played the coward guy. That's right, Kansas Law Dog.
Oh, Law Dog, yeah. Not Earl.
No.
Wow, what's wrong with me?
I should know that guy's name.
I just watched the movie 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. But anyway, that's two Tombstone references. Ike Clanton, yes, very good.
That's Stephen Lang?
That's Stephen Lang.
That guy was old, and Stephen Lang is, he's old now, but that movie's 30 years old.
Right, exactly.
Holy cow.
Yeah, that's Stephen Lang.
Law Dog, Law Dog. Yeah, I love that. Oh, my goodness. Well...
2 Tombstone references, consecutive episodes. I'm gunning for all season.
Well, I think, yeah. Well, we'll have opportunities for that.
Indeed.
Wonderful Easter weekend. Weather here was just absolutely beautiful. We had 12 hours of church, so I one up you.
You bested me.
No, it was a wonderful, beautiful weekend. We took the girls for Eve's first movie-going experience. Eve's our 8-year-old daughter.
Nice.
She's autistic. She's never been to a movie before, but she's been talking about it. So first movie-going experience this weekend took her to see Super Mario Brothers.
Fantastic.
And it was great on multiple levels. It was great to see my daughter enjoy a movie thoroughly, sit and watch it. And my other daughter, 5, who's had several movie experiences, loved it as well. And it was also Super Mario Brothers on the big screen done right. Fantastic family movie, just super clean. really, really had a great time. Chris Pratt's voice is spot on. The angle of he is a Italian American plumber. He sounds like a guy from Brooklyn. Much better than I know we all love the Charles Martinet.
Sure, yeah.
It's a Mia, but can you really listen to
No.
It's a Mia for 90 minutes? You could not.
And I never got the backlash to Pratt to begin with. Because, I mean, you're absolutely right. You can't do Charles Martinet for a whole movie. You can't do a silent protagonist as Mario for a whole movie. That doesn't work.
You cannot.
So, yeah, when I heard his voice on the trailer, I was like, oh, non-issue. This is great.
It sounds great. Jack Black is Bowser.
Yeah.
Inspired. Hilarious. Did you see it?
I have not seen the movie yet, but I've seen the trailers, and I saw the Peach music video.
You will enjoy it. Yes, you will enjoy it. And we spent, though. I will say this. I'm gonna sound like we're two middle-aged guys, but I'm about to sound like the elderly get off my lawn guy.
Uh-huh.
We spent $90 on a matinee, and
it's insane.
That's why we barely go to the movies anymore. I mean, I know that there's other reasons, but a big thing is you wait a bit and you can watch it at home and you make your own popcorn and you spend $9. But holy cow! But it was worth it, and we had a great time. So strongly recommend to our listeners. You're an adult who loves Mario, you're gonna love it. You're a kid, you're gonna love it. It's got the jokes work, but they don't work subversively. They're not going over the kids' heads and hitting you, and you laugh, and it's not like that. It's just fun, good humor for everyone to enjoy. So.
That's awesome. Well, I'm glad you had a good time.
Also, the resurrection of Jesus. That also
happened.
important too.
That was an Easter thing.
That was I mean, I opened with Mario, and then I get I feel bad about that. But no, it was a wonderful time spent with the family. It was great. Beautiful weekend for it. I always like it when Easter is later rather than earlier. I don't fully understand the whole rubric of how Easter is placed in the calendar. Something to do with the moon or something. I don't know.
It's King Gregor's fault, I think. I don't know what. He did something one day.
Guy.
Yeah.
Well, hey, before we get into our main topic today, which is going to be a great show, I have a challenge for you.
Okay.
I want to play a little game here. It's called Do You Remember?
Okay.
Now, here's where you insert the Sarah McLachlan. Maybe we shouldn't.
This is copyright issues.
Crying.
Right.
Well, yeah,
but we would save puppies if we did.
Yeah. Well, I know that she would remember. But no, do you remember? I want to see if you remember this.
Okay.
I think you will. But really, I think the challenge of this game is, do we remember it the same way? Because I've established myself as an unreliable narrator.
Okay.
Do you remember how you and I discovered the music of David Bowie?
I remember how I discovered it. So, and that's going to be different from how you discovered it, because you kind of inadvertently introduced me to David Bowie. And so I remember distinctly, and for our listeners, Dave is a few years older than I am. He had his driver's license, and I did not. And that summer, we just kind of bounced around in that first car that you had, which was it barely ran.
1986 Chevy Cavalier sedan.
There you go.
Mostly primer and rust.
Yes.
A little bit of red.
Yes. And we bounced around in that car. I remember Desperado was a big movie in theaters that summer. We went and saw that. And you were into Bowie, and you had Changes Bowie, the CD best of, and you were playing it in the car, and it was such an old car that was rigged together that you had a portable CD player hooked to two speakers in the back seat.
Yes, I do remember that.
So it wasn't even properly run.
Yeah, it was running on batteries. Yeah.
Yes, and you eventually sold me that CD player because you could not keep up with the battery costs.
The battery costs were breaking me.
Yes, and so it was in that kind of an environment we were listening to Changes Bowie, and I was kind of bouncing off of it. It wasn't doing it for me, except I loved the song Ziggy Stardust, and I loved the song Heroes. And those two were the songs that were my gateway to Bowie. I would listen to those, and then I'd kind of have those on just kind of a repeat. And then I'd say, okay, well, I'm going to listen to the whole CD again. And then I'd pick up another song. And I was like, oh, I like that song. And rinse and repeat. And then finally, the first Bowie album I bought was the long out of print 2-disc Ryko singles collection.
Yes.
and I just took off from there.
Yeah.
And from that singles collection, whatever song I was most into at the moment, whenever I had enough money, I'd go buy the album that song belonged to. And then that's how I built the collection of his individual albums.
And then culminating with the release in 1995 of Outside, which sort of brought it all together.
Yes, and which is one of both Dave and I's absolute favorite Bowie albums is Outside. So good.
Without a doubt, the best Bowie album.
Okay, so I'm not going to give it number one, but it's definitely top 5 for me. And so yeah, that was just a wonderful period to be alive, a wonderful period to have discovered Bowie, and then be on deck for that release, and then carried on through until his untimely death. So that's how I remember it.
Okay,
how did I do?
I'm going to roll it back a bit because I remember me figuring out who the heck he was, and you were with me. And it's very interesting that your memories are focused around the janky car that looked like a bad tie. It was how my brother described it. It was a hideous car, barely held together. The muffler had more bass than the speakers. I'll roll it back a few months into what got me to buy Changes Bowie. We were watching VH1, and we liked the Rolling Stones. We didn't like the Rolling Stones. We loved the Rolling Stones. Oh. And here comes this video with Mick Jagger wearing this large, poofy pirate shirt, and he's dancing. He's dancing, in fact, in the street.
Yes, he is.
Now, he was just on one street in the video, but the song he was singing expands out to tell a story about dancing in many streets across the country.
Yeah,
across the world. Yeah. On the streets of Brazil and South America. And who is with him? Well, this guy is with him. And why are they singing so close? That was very bizarre, this blonde gentleman. And he produces, out of nowhere, during the middle of this song and dance, a Pepsi.
Yeah. And
he's just drinking a Pepsi. And I got to wonder, did the director was like, Mr. Bowie, please put down the Pepsi and focus. Yeah. No, yeah, he's getting paid. That was when he was doing Pepsi ads too. But it was this bizarre thing. We like the Rolling Stones. We love, that music and the music of that time. And there's this blonde guy we figure out is David Bowie. And I don't know if we knew who he was for some reason, or if it was just David Bowie and Mick Jagger on the little bottom left hand corner of the screen, VH1, back when they used to have something called music videos. But we were perplexed. But that was an interesting version of the song.
Yep.
And that is what... And I think I was mostly just confused as, we knew Mick Jagger was cool, but who is this other guy? He's so cool, he doesn't even really have to participate in the music video. He can stop and drink a Pepsi, and then get back to the dancing, and, like I said, the bizarre... He wasn't respecting Mick Jagger's personal space.
No.
They were a little too close. But he had an interesting voice, and that is what... I remember everything you were talking about listening in the car and all that stuff.
Yeah.
My attempts to block out some of the things around that period of my life have failed, and I do remember them. But that I do have those memories. But I roll it back to that, and that's how I remember the initial introduction. It has to do all because... of dancing in the streets.
Yeah, I do remember that music video. I remember that, but it did not connect with my brain, even to ask the question of who is this other guy with Mick Jagger. I was just like, okay, it's somebody singing with Mick Jagger. And then you got Changes Bowie, and then that was the end of it.
Do you know if this is an honest question, was Changes Bowie from, and I think I might be introducing a future show topic here. Was that one of the Columbia House mistakes that we made? Is that how I got that album, or did I buy that at one of our local used CD stores?
So I would have, without question, said one of our CD used stores until you just said Columbia House, and now
we got trapped in that. I think I still have to buy 4 albums.
Yeah, they'll come find you one of these days.
They're going to take my house.
I still question whether that was actually a good deal or not. I mean, of course, the people who never completed the commitment, of course it was a good deal if you were morally okay with that. But if you actually bought the 10 albums, did you come out ahead?
I think that it was the, it's hard for us to imagine that now because we're so used to dealing with Amazon and shipping and returning stuff. But at the time, in the 90s, shipping something back was a
Yeah.
huge hassle.
Yeah.
And it was every month we're going to send you a selection. If you don't like it, you can send it back. That became you ended up just buying stuff you otherwise would not buy by default because you had it and it was a hassle to send it back, so you're just going to pay for it. So the whole thing felt like it felt like a scam, and it felt like they got you to overbuy because it was just so inconvenient to not send it, just so inconvenient to not buy it, right? And it's hard for us to imagine because now I think, well, I just go into my Amazon, choose, I'm going to pause this subscription, or I take it up to UPS and show them my, the barcode,
Yep.
and that just doesn't exist. And it's,
And I mean, 10 CDs for a penny. Come on.
for a penny.
How
And
could
I
you
don't
turn
think
that
you even
down?
paid shipping. I
don't think so.
Yeah. I mean, it was crazy.
You just
And-
taped a penny to that card.
Yeah, you got to wonder. Yeah,
There's a whole segment of people
Oh,
who
my
are going to be
goodness.
like, this. They're making this crap up.
That doesn't exist. There's no such thing as pennies taped to cards, and sort of fantasy are these guys living in. You got to wonder. There was a lot of people employed by that,
yeah.
right? And what happened? I mean, what was the day that they came in and they realized that this the bedrock industry that puts food on the table, this whole 10 CDs for a penny world that they live in,
That's a good question. It died way before streaming, so
It did.
you can't argue that was the cause.
It did, but you can probably track it to internet purchases and
probably.
the ability to get better deals on things.
Yeah.
And I don't know. That'd be a really interesting thing to research. And what was the death of Columbia House?
Yeah.
And, maybe just a mob, a throng of angry people who still had to buy 6 $28 CDs decided to burn down the Columbia House building.
I'll tell you though, if you call Netflix right now and say the death of Columbia House, you'll get $1 million to make a documentary. I guarantee it.
That would be actually a really interesting documentary. If the right filmmaker brings the right sense of humor to
I'd
it.
watch it.
And I'd love to see stories of people who were sued by Columbia, whose credit was ruined. I couldn't buy a house for 7 years, and I had student loan debts on one hand and Columbia House debts on the other.
All because of that Creedence Clearwater Greatest Hits.
All because I wanted the two discs doors
Oh, the
best
greatest
of
hits,
set.
yeah.
Yes, even the true fans don't listen to best of. So
No, that's true. Yeah.
start with Morrison Hotel.
And Love Her Madly is the only song you won't like.
It's oh goodness! All right, so I think on that one, we both had a very good memory. We just, we had focused on different periods. Wow, it's really interesting. Okay, I thought that was a fun game.
That was an excellent
Yeah.
game.
All right, now I miss my old janky car. You know what? The cool thing about that car was I didn't have a car payment.
Oh yeah.
So
and I remember
maybe I do miss it.
I remember you got tires for your birthday, and you were over the moon. And me, being a few years younger, not understanding, I was like, tires for your birthday?
No.
That sounds so lame.
If somebody was to buy me tires for my birthday, it'd be the greatest
Yes,
gift I'd ever received.
exactly. Because we're middle-aged.
Yeah, that's
now.
right, because we are middle-aged guys. And I buy my kids tires for birthday
Yes.
and for Christmas, and they're like, yeah. They're
But
thinking,
someday.
but Dad, if you just buy these for me, when it's not my birthday or Christmas, I just get them. And I'm like, well, welcome to adulthood.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right, so now we're going to move into our main topic for today's episode. And I promised last week or last 2 weeks, I don't know how we're releasing these things. I promised last time that it would not be another series of 3 selections, and it's not going to be. Instead, our topic today is the Turbografx 16. And if you don't know what that is, it's a video game system that really never got its chance to shine in the United States. So how do you want to do this, Dave? Do you want me to do some history of the Turbografx? Do you want to run down some facts and figures?
Yeah. Well, I'd say, there's two kinds of people who are listening to this right now, and one is like Turbografx. Oh man, yeah, I remember that. I knew a kid who had a cousin who had a friend in Canada who supposedly had one. Or you have other the group of people saying, "What's a Turbografx 16, and why should I care?"
Yes.
This is a topic that is really interesting and meaningful, and I think that for both audiences, I think we'll be able to find a way to make this entertaining and informative for you. So I know I think that let's just kind of you want to walk through the history,
Okay.
and I'll toss in where I feel like I have some insight.
Sure. So the history of the Turbografx is the history of two differently named but the same console. It was released in Japan in 1987 as the PC Engine, and it's a tiny little box of a system. It's just the cutest thing that's ever been made. And it was released to great fanfare in Japan because at that time in 1987, the Famicom, which we know as the Nintendo Entertainment System, was 5 years old. It was released in 1983 in Japan. So they were getting something that was new, that was more powerful, that was more exciting. And that's how the Japanese gaming culture related to the PC Engine. Now, to give a little bit of context to what's happening in the United States at that time, the NES was not released in the US until 1985, but that was only a limited market. It did not hit nationwide release until September 1986. So we're barely just getting the NES when Japan is getting the PC Engine, and it is the hot new thing. In the United States, we didn't get the PC Engine until 1989, and we got it as the Turbografx 16, which is kind of a problematic name because most people would tell you it's not a 16-bit system.
So it ushered in the Turbografx and the PC Engine before that, ushered in what we called the next generation, what we would have called at the time the next generation, the fourth generation of systems,
Correct,
right?
correct.
So you had the first generation was like super simple, basic, like a handful of arcade games or stuff that you would plug into your TV, and it was basically Pong. It did one thing. In very short generation. The second generation was really, it comes down to it, Atari 2600 and systems like that, right?
Yep, Magnavox Odysseys,
Magnavox
things like
Odysseys, ColecoVision,
Yep.
Intellivision, stuff that you could. You buy a box, you buy your console, and then you'd buy software, your cartridges, and plug it in. You could switch them out. That was the second generation, late 70s, early 80s. Third generation was Nintendo Entertainment System, right? Everybody knows it. Square gray box, Super Mario, the video game that brought video games back.
Yes.
And then this Turbografx 16 ushered in the fourth generation, the 16-bit. I'm doing air quotes here for our listeners at home who can't see me. And you're right. It's problematic. It's controversial even to this day.
Yeah, but it was only controversial in the United States. Like in Japan, they had no problem with it. And in the United States, because it's 1989 release, it was released. Let me get this right. 2 weeks after Sega Genesis.
Sega Genesis. Yep.
And so that.
Do you know what caused the delay?
I do not.
So the delay was caused by the Japanese leaders at Hudson and NEC being convinced that the system design in Japan would not translate well to the American audience.
Because it was small.
It was small. It was white. It did not look like a piece of electronics equipment. The Famicom in Japan was a very unusual design, interesting color scheme. I believe it was a gold and red or something like that, or
yeah, maroon and off-white.
Maroon and off-white. Thank you. Yeah, and then the NES in America, it was gray and boxy. It almost looked like a piece. It looked like a piece of stereo equipment.
Yeah, or it was modeled after VCR.
After VCR. Yeah, so they wanted to do something similar, make it with the Turbografx 16, make it beefier, make it bigger, make it look like it belonged on a shelf of electronics components, and they spent nearly 2 years.
That's surprising.
Researching, designing, and releasing this, and in that period of time, they managed to go from being the first fourth generation system to being the second fourth generation system in the United States, and coming out head to head with the Sega Genesis, who was a true 16-bit
Yes.
system. So that is what I think the controversy really stems from, because in truth, if you look at the Turbografx at a component level, the brain, the CPU, is an 8-bit CPU, but it had the GPU, the graphics processing unit, was a 16-bit, and it did generate 16-bit graphics that were very much on par with the Sega Genesis. There was some differences. It had some advantages in the color space. It had some disadvantages in the parallax and layers and moving backgrounds and things like that. But they were pretty darn close. But because it got released at the same time, it kind of took the wind out of the sails.
Yeah, it totally did. And the Sega Genesis launched with a huge arcade title, which was Altered Beast, and the TurboGrafx 16 had nothing to launch with. It launched with Keith Courage and Alpha Zone.
A better game than Altered Beast.
I would agree, but what does that mean? It doesn't mean anything in the United States.
No kid had played like, oh yeah, I just went to the arcade and played TurboGrafx or the Altered Beast, and what's a Keith Courage and what's an Alpha? I mean, it did not. On so many levels, it did not resonate with the American audience, which is a disappointment.
I say that's what they never recovered from. I mean, the delay for the change of the box, that's a shame and all that kind of thing. But not having a mascot, and even later, and I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but even later when Bonk became the mascot of the system, not strong enough to take down Mario, not strong enough to take down Sonic.
Nope.
I mean, it was kind of dead in the water, unfortunately.
No mascot has been, though. I mean, you can look at the Sony's mascot, Crash Bandicoot, couldn't take on.
No.
The problem with that is Sonic and Mario, you can't go head to head on the mascot front. You still can't.
No, yeah.
30 years on.
Yeah.
The mascot war is a different subject, but that was tough. Let's go on to a little bit to the library of the games, because I think there's something in the library of games that I think also feeds into that, what caused them to not be successful. But
okay, I'm fine going on to the library of games, but I do want to circle back to how many variations of the TurboGrafx 16 there were.
Many.
But so as long as we can put a pin in that, then what are you thinking on games?
Well, I was going to say that the TurboGrafx library here in the United States was light on sports, light on RPG, decent on arcade style action games. I say style because they did stuff that wasn't in the U.S. arcades, right? But they had some good ones. They had some great ones even. But what it was heavy on was a type of game called the shooter or the shoot 'em up.
Yep.
And that was not, while popular here in the States, it is not the kind of game that was making its mark here. People were playing the NES, the Sega Genesis. They were loving the RPGs, whether they were, the Japanese-centered ones that were translated, or, ones that had the more American, sensibilities. But the sports games were getting more advanced and becoming closer to more like sports activities. And TurboGrafx just did not have those. And, the shoot 'em ups, they're not games I can play. I mean, I'm terrible at them. I last about 2 seconds until my little spaceship is destroyed. But they had really leaned into that very heavy, and they just I think that played into it. The library, the relative weakness of the library.
Yes, I would agree with that completely. And at the time of TurboGrafx being released, I was not into shoot 'em ups either. I've grown to an appreciation of the genre as I've gotten older. Still not my favorite, but definitely a heavy shoot 'em up system, which was huge in Japan. I mean, that was a big thing for them. But to kind of put into perspective, the American TurboGrafx 16 library is 139 games. The Japanese PC Engine library is 539 games.
I didn't realize it was that big. I knew it was bigger than the U.S., but wow, that's a huge disparity.
And that's not even counting CD-ROM games. So just the little Hue cards, America did not get a lot, and it's plainly because they didn't sell a lot. And had TurboGrafx 16 systems sold off the shelf, then they would have kept porting Japanese games over and making new American-focused TurboGrafx 16 titles, but it just wasn't there. It was a chicken and egg scenario.
You mentioned the CD. Mm-hmm. You mentioned the Hue cards. There was a lot of innovation in the TurboGrafx, right? And then let's circle back to the different variants of the system.
All right.
They were the first home system to have a CD-ROM drive.
They were, and not only first home system, first home anything to have a CD-ROM drive. And a lot of people credit the taking over of CD technology in all different industries to the fact that PC Engine pushed it. I was about to say TurboGrafx, but the CD-ROM sold worse in the United States than the system sold, so it was barely a blip. But it did very well in Japan. They bought the CD attachment, and the primary thing that did for Turbografx, they did not start chasing full motion video games like the Sega CD did, but what it did was it allowed for full quality music, Redbook audio, CD quality, so you would start to get some amazing soundtracks with these games, and as a gamer, that's appealing. You put this in, you suddenly get full orchestra, or you hear a real guitar, and it's like, wow, that's novel, that's something new. And that combined with dialogue, they put on CDs, and then finally combined with just being able to produce a larger game, having more levels in your shoot 'em up, or having more levels in your arcade style game. That's what the CD-ROM brought to the Turbografx, which, going back and looking at this system historically, I appreciate a lot of these games because they're really good. They're solid. They're not trying to create a new genre with CD, like I feel some of the American CD-ROM games initially.
Yeah, they wanted to be interactive movies,
right?
It was which was a failure. They were not fun.
Was, yeah. And so instead, NEC just kind of used it to say, we're just going to do more of the same, but literally more of the same. Yep. And it was a great move. A big standout title from PC Engine CD-ROM is Castlevania Rondo of Blood, which is finally known in the States, but was not for a long time, and is arguably the greatest Castlevania game out there. So there were some amazing titles released for this add-on. We did get the add-on in the United States. It sold like crap. Probably the biggest CD game that we got in the United States was the Addams Family movie tie-in. That kind of puts it in perspective.
Was that just a side-scroller?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, you're just jumping through the mansion. And you even played, I don't know how familiar you are with the Addams Family movie, but the bad lawyer in the film.
Oh man, I haven't watched that film.
That's the character you play in the game.
Oh, well, that makes sense.
Why would you? Yeah. So anyway, missed opportunity, we'll say. But it did. I won't say it sold well enough to get the next iteration of TurboGrafx, but we did get the next iteration, which was the Turbo Duo.
So we mentioned Hue cards.
Yes.
Not the first system to have games on a card. The Sega Master System had a handful on their card reader. But they were the first system to innovate with them in the form of the Turbo... Wait, I'm sorry. You said Duo. I jumped to the Express.
That's okay.
Oh, my goodness. Oh.
So,
scratch it.
Okay.
We're canceling this episode, guys.
Oh, the whole thing's over.
It's over.
Let me salvage what I can. So the Turbo Duo was just a combined CD with the TurboGrafx 16 as one system. If you try to buy one today, they're notorious because the capacitors explode and leak all over everything. I had a chance to buy one that was professionally recapped, and I regret that I did not do it every day of my life. Anyway, the Turbo Express is a fantastic piece of hardware, and I'm going to let you talk about that.
Well, the innovation, right? So what the Turbo Express was, the games came on a Hue card, right? Those of you that are not familiar with the Hue card, they're basically the size of a credit card. They're the thickness of 2 credit cards. And the game was stored on that. And what that allowed them to do is when they came up with a portable system, which the Turbo Express was, and it had the form factor and the size very similar to the Nintendo Game Boy, the yellow screen Game Boy, but it allowed them to put the full game cartridges that played on the home console into the Turbo Express. Kind of think about like the Nintendo Switch. Kind of sort of like that. You could take the games that you play at home on the go. And that innovation was really driven by the fact that they were smart in their media choice, and they picked something that could fit into the handheld form factor. And so you could play all these games that you could on your home console at home on your home console, and then on the go in the Turbo Express. The Turbo Express also had like a TV tuner, had some other innovations, had a 3-hour battery life on 6 AAAs somewhere in there. Those handheld systems at the time were notorious for chewing through batteries. The Game Boy was probably the best because it did not have the full color screen. It was not backlit. But the Turbo Express, it was an incredible piece of of portable hardware. That whole concept of being able to play the games on that you play at home on the go. It took 5 years for the next system and the Sega Nomad to do the similar type thing, and it did it at the end of the life of the Sega Genesis, trying to just squeak out a little bit more sales and a little bit more out of the software that maybe people already had the collection. They could sell them this hardware, but the Turbografx, that was NEC and Hudson doing that by releasing the Turbo Express at the height of the system. Smart, innovative, but it was very expensive.
It was.
And it didn't do you a whole lot of good if you didn't already own a Turbografx 16.
Absolutely.
So it was a brilliant piece of add-on, companion hardware, but it just was sold into a market that hadn't embraced the Turbografx 16, so it didn't get traction either. But really cool piece.
Very cool. And I remember the first time I saw one in the glass case at Toys R Us, and I was reading the description, and like my little teenage brain could not process it. I'm like, it's the same games as the home system, and I could not fathom that was technologically possible. I've wanted a Turbo Express from that day ever since. It's missing from my collection. Someday I'd love to have one, but it was truly an amazing little thing, and it was easy at that time to say, oh, well, the Game Boy's out. I mean, when you're dealing with something like this, how can the Game Boy possibly compete? Of course, cost, battery life, all these things made the Game Boy hugely successful. That ran on way past any time it should have.
Well, and the Game Boy also came with a killer app, and that was
Tetris,
handheld Tetris, which, was a brilliant move on Nintendo's part. And I don't even know if there was a pack-in game for the Express.
I don't believe there was.
Yeah. I mean, they just counted on, the millions of Turbografx 16 owners just pulling a card from their deck of cards and playing it. But there was another innovation that came from this. It was a very innovative system. What's interesting, though, is for all the innovations, they still had a 2-button controller.
They did. Now, in Japan, they did see a 6-button controller. Do you know why?
Probably for Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat.
Exactly right. The Street Fighter. There was never a Mortal Kombat port on PC Engine, but there was a Street Fighter 2 port because everything had to have a Street Fighter 2 port.
That was a CD, though, only? Or was that on a HU card?
I'm 99% sure it's CD only.
Okay, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, and it's the worst looking Street Fighter 2 port you'll ever see, but from what I understand, plays fairly well. So they did ultimately make a 6-button, but I don't really count that amongst the library because of one game used it.
Right.
So yeah, 2-button controller. And I remember, this may be fading into the memory section of this podcast a little bit, but I remember that when we had Turbografx 16s, we were like, why would you need more? 2 buttons, it's fine.
They did have, which was a cool innovation, not really an innovation, but I thought it was interesting. They put turbo switches right there in the stock controllers, which you had to buy for other systems. Third-party controllers with turbo functions. It was an interesting choice.
It was very helpful for shoot 'em ups, though. With as many as they had.
Yes, and still couldn't play them to save my life with that. But yeah, just the innovation was man. It was, when you think about it, it's kind of like a masterclass in how you can be a better product than your competitors and still lose.
Right.
Because they were really. NEC and Hudson were intending to compete with the Famicom and the NES.
Yeah.
And when they competed head-to-head with the Famicom, they were beating the Famicom in those early days in Japan. The first year, they outsold the Famicom, which, that's a big deal. In Japan in 1987, 1988, to be beating Nintendo was a huge deal. Sega was competing with them with the Mark III, which was the Sega Master System here in the States. And, they were being trounced in Japan and pretty much all over the world, except for a little tiny bit in Europe. They had an upper hand in South America. But it was, this little system was, beating them. But because of those delays in the States, and I think because of a game library that was not suited for the prevalent tastes in the of the Western audience, they just didn't have much of a chance. And when they were going against the Sega Genesis, there were some differences, striking at times, in the way that these systems looked. And the Sega Genesis sports games played, and never been a big sports game player. I do like baseball games, but other than that, not too big. But the sports games simply looked better. Yeah. They had celebrity endorsements. Yeah. Reggie Jackson baseball was Sega Master System. Tommy Lasorda baseball was on the Genesis. There was nothing like that. Celebrity endorsement, the TurboGrafx, probably the biggest thing I think of is Jackie Chan.
Yeah, they did have a Jackie Chan game, which also existed on NES.
Although it was far, far better looking.
Yes.
And playing on the it wasn't Stunt Master. It was Jackie Chan, like Kung Fu Adventures. Stunt Master was the PlayStation.
Stunt Master was PlayStation 1. It was... Oh, man. I can't remember the subtitle of that one. Jackie Chan Kung Fu something.
Kung Fu something. Yeah, it was something. But you mentioned the memory section. I would like to get into that. Another thing real quick. A couple things I didn't know. Fantastic. I mentioned a masterclass on how not to do something. And from the business point of view, NEC was so confident in their ability to make this work in the States, they made two really bad errors in the launch of the Turbografx in the United States. One is they agreed to a licensing model with Hudson Soft where they paid a licensing fee for every console produced, not sold. So they were incurring the costs up front and not based on sales. So they were losing money as they were rolling off the assembly line on these guys and only recouping this money when the systems are sold. The other thing NEC did is they pulled back on production of their successful commercial and other technology lines, the televisions they would make, the VCRs, Laserdisc players. They pulled back production of those to focus on building Turbografx. Well, they didn't sell well. So you took a double hit there because they were losing revenue on the things they weren't selling and they weren't making revenue on the things that they were selling. So it really damaged NEC, their standing, to the point where some people were going to be listening to this and be like, I don't even know what NEC is. Well, they were the Sony of their day.
Yeah.
And now I don't even know if they're still in existence, at least not in the same form.
I'm not sure either.
Yeah. It was really interesting. The other interesting thing is that there was no official European release of the Turbografx. They had waited so long, and with the North American release, the change of the style, that the PAL release, they did not end up actually having a big formal rollout. There was a handful of systems that were built for PAL. There was conversion kits and stuff you could buy, dongles and things, but they didn't have the big European presence because the investment was in the United States and it didn't have that big push.
And if I remember right, in Europe it was the Core Graphics.
Was that what it was called?
I think so. Because in Japan, towards the end of the life cycle, they released like a cheaper version for people who needed another one or hadn't jumped on the train yet, called the Core Graphics. And I think that they just kind of pushed that over to Europe, and they were like, let's see if we can make some money over there. And so I believe it's known as the Core Graphics in Europe.
So another thing that they did, innovation, I do want to get to memories, but because I think, man, there's so many innovations here. They also released, they did backwards compatible generations when that was, I don't want to say it wasn't a thing, but it was less popular. Atari did it with the Atari 7800. Incidentally, the first new next generation Atari system Atari built with the 5200 did not have backwards compatibility. So that was not like a given that these systems that they would release, that the successor would be able to play the old games. But they did that. They released the Supergraphics in 1989. 2 years after the release of the Turbografx, they released the follow-up that could play, it was called the Supergraphics. It could play both Turbografx 16 games and the new Supergraphics games, but they only released like 6 games, 5 games. I've read different articles with different things. I guess there was pack-ins, and there was I don't know. But at any rate, they barely had any games.
Yeah.
Didn't, and the updates were modest.
Yeah.
I mean, it was not what you would look at and say that's not generational. It's more like the PlayStation 4, PlayStation 4 Pro, where it was just spec enhancements than it was anything that was going to blow the doors off.
That's a good analogy, the PS4 to the PS4 Pro. And what I've read is that it was mainly designed to get an arcade perfect port of 1941 out into the public, which is a fine game, but I didn't know there were people clamoring so hard that they would be willing to buy a new system for 1941. But
wow. But again, another innovation, right? Didn't work for them, but that whole we're going to do a backwards compatible, really intergenerational upgrade, and it was like the Pro Turbografx 16, and stuff you see today done successfully.
It looks wild. Have you seen pictures?
I actually have not.
It looks almost like a car engine kind of thing. It's got I don't know. After this, you should Google.
I will
look up a
check
picture.
that out.
But before we move on, there's one other iteration of the Turbografx I don't even know if you're aware of, but it's called the PC Engine LT. Have you heard of this one?
I've not heard of this one.
Well, they say LT stands for laptop. I don't know if that's true, but it was a clamshell system that had a built-in LCD, and you could take it with you, and you could plug it into a car, and you could pop that little guy open, and you could play yourself some PC Engine anywhere you wanted to.
That is crazy. And this was an official item?
It was official. No, it was absolutely official Hudson release in Japan. Never made it to the States.
I was going to say it didn't make it.
But what an interesting, again, iteration of this system where they were just saying, we're going to make this available to you no matter where you are or what you're doing.
They did that years later, the PlayStations, when they did the tiny, not the minis, but the classics.
PS1 ONE.
Yeah, the PS1, yeah. And when they had those screens that could be attached to that. So, again, NEC, being ahead of the game, just not producing a product that either they produced the wrong product for the wrong audience, or they were a little bit late. There's a lot of interesting business sort of failures here. Whereas Nintendo was able to keep with that, extend the life of their system through, with the NES, and then roll out the Super Nintendo in the States here a year and a half after the Sega Genesis, after the Turbografx. It interesting, shows you that different sort of business model. Nintendo wasn't, I'm not going to say innovation adverse, but they had this sort of slow and steady wins the race and point of view, and generally speaking, that worked for them.
Yeah.
Really interesting stuff there. I'd never heard of the LT. I'm going to have to check that out as well.
It's wild. So here is my question to you. This system that barely had over 100 games, that was shunned by every video game player out there as being uninteresting and not competing with the Sega Genesis or even holding a candle to the old NES, why did we end up with one?
So let me tell you how I recall it happening. And I'm going to... I may have got too close to the microphone. I'm going to tell you how I recall it happening. We'll see if it lines up with yours, with your memory of it. So I recall Toys R Us at the time was awesome.
Yes.
I have fond memories of every iteration of Toys R Us as they went through and, changed the store layout. I remember going in as the store was closing and being truly heartbroken. The end of a Toy Story era. Toy Store era. Toy Story era.
It works.
Man, I'm struggling today. But at the time we would go and they had the glass cases and you'd walk and, down this, and it was like a video game museum. And then you'd go to the game section and it would be almost like laminated plastic views of the games,
the box
on
art.
cards, the box art. You could flip it and see the back, and they had tons of games. Commodore 64, Commodore 128. I mean, just incredible. It took up 2 huge aisles of the Toys R Us here in our local Toys R Us. And I just remember always loving to go there and see these things. But I remember I've always been, I've liked the stuff that had an air of mystery to it, that I didn't know anyone who had them, that I would read articles in GamePro about the Turbografx 16, and it was like, wow, that's interesting. They have a game called JJ and Jeff, and you play as 2 guys in suits that kick cans or something. I don't really know what it was, but I remember thinking, no one knows what this is. This is so mysterious. I want one. And I felt the same way about the Sega Master System. And that I would play at Montgomery Ward, and play on the demo station there, and it just being, I don't know anyone who has one of these. But Turbografx, it was even more so because you couldn't even play it. It was just something you read about in magazines or you saw it behind the glass. And frankly, unlike the Master System that had games that you could play in the arcade or games that were already on the Nintendo, just with a different twist, these had games that, like,
Never
what's
heard
a
of
bonk?
it. Yeah, never heard of it.
What's a legendary axe? I've never seen that. And and Keith Courage was this bizarre looking game. In one moment, you're this friendly looking fella with a dagger, and you're fighting, I don't know, slimes or something. I don't remember what in the overworld what you were doing. And then in the underworld, you were this mechanized knight with a sword that took up 2/3 of the screen. It was like, what is this crazy?
And fighting guys with pistols for heads.
Yes.
It was bizarre.
Bizarre and beautiful, right?
Yes.
Colorful and sharp. So all I know is we were going and seeing this, the compounded interest from the mystery. Ooh, and then, reading in the Game Pro. So I would love to go, and the Game Pro was expensive. It was $5. But while my mom would be grocery shopping, I would go and find the video game magazine section of the magazine rack and flip through it and just enjoyed reading about this. And we'd go and I would watch the prices go down. Mm-hmm. And it's, $249, $199, got down and down and down until $49.95. And I'm like, okay. And I saved up some money. You saved up some money, and we're gonna buy this thing. And I remember telling my mom what I was gonna do with the money. She said, "Why? Why? You have a Nintendo?" And my answer was, "Oh, it's so cool. It's 16-bit." And she was like, "I don't know what that is, but I guess it's your money." I wasn't hassling anybody for the money, and I remember going to Toys R Us, you and I buying them on the same day, very excited.
Yeah.
Did they go below $49.95? Did we get them for $29.95, or did I've been trying to remember which price it was.
49 was what was in my head.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what it was. It could have gotten lower than that, but at the time we bought them, I'm pretty sure it's what it was. And we got these things, and I remember the big draw for me was just the fact that this is a new experience. Mm. And I did not know anyone who could tell me anything about it. And it wasn't like the Neo Geo where, where it was unattainable.
Right.
It was something that I could feasibly get, too. I was attracted to that. That's my memory of it. How do you recall it?
So I'm lockstep with you in a lot of things, but I think I may have made this a little more apocryphal in my head. So I had a few interactions with the Turbografx 16 that you either did not or did not mention. I distinctly remember a store called Venture having a display of the Turbografx.
Did they?
Not one that you could play.
Okay, all right.
But it was behind a case, and it had like a rolling video of 7 or 8 games where it would show, gameplay footage of it, and they were like, Turbografx 16, wow. You got to have this thing.
Maybe I do remember that. Yeah. I did play the Nintendo a lot there.
Sure.
My parents had a Venture credit card, so that's one of the places they shopped.
Yeah. So I remember that, and I remember seeing Bloody Wolf and thinking, wow, that game looks amazing. And, you're a kind of a Rambo-ish kind of guy and running around fighting and shooting guns. And I was like, that game looks way better than anything I've ever seen on the NES. So I had that interaction. And then I kind of didn't pay a lot of attention to it. And I remember seeing articles in magazines and that kind of thing and thinking, oh, well, that's not the thing I have. Because, I think, especially I look at the way some of my kids have grown up, and it's kind of like a we'll get everything mentality.
Yeah.
And when we were kids, it was like, I don't have that, so it might as well not exist on the planet. And that's kind of the way I treated it. Now, where this gets apocryphal is in my brain, I remember like a Saturday morning, you calling me and you being like, the Turbografx 16 is $49.
That may have happened.
We're going to get them.
That may have happened because I know that I would call stores if I was interested in something, whether or not I was ever going to get it. I would call and check prices. So that may very well have happened.
So, and then further going with the apocryphal version of the story is I don't remember having $49. Like, I mean, I can totally believe that this was something you were gunning for and you were saving up for. But me, I was like, that was not on my radar. I don't have it. So I remember like getting a collection of comic books and action figures and taking a detour to a flea market first so that we could sell this stuff so that I could get the $50 to cover the cost of mine. Like, that's in my head. And again, maybe it didn't happen, but it makes a great visual. And then
I don't recall that. I'm pretty sure the phone call happened.
Yeah, because I know for a fact it was my parents that took us.
Absolutely, I know that because your parents were nice.
Well, I mean, they're sure that's not the only reason.
My mom and dad aren't going to listen to this because they're dead. So, there's I'm not going to offend them.
Okay, all right.
Your parents were very, very nice.
They did indulge our adventures quite well.
They did.
And so, so I was like, Mom, Dave wants to go to Toys R Us and we're going to buy this video game thing. And she's like, okay. And off we went. And then I do remember, us getting both of them. And I had a brief thought for a moment that it was like, if it's on sale this much, what if they don't have two? But there was no concern there.
There's no concern. It was like RC Cola, like, oh, we've never sold one of these before. We've got 50 of them in the back. Are you sure you just want to?
So we got them, and we had the pack in of Keith Courage,
yes.
And neither of us knew what that were, but that didn't stop us from playing the snot out of it.
But where did we go just after Toys R Us? Because we went somewhere else.
We did. We went to a store called Caveman.
Yes.
Which has since evolved into Vintage Stock.
It's kind of known across the
country.
Across the Midwest,
sure,
but people across the country probably know of that name if you sort of are in the collectible world.
Yeah, huge. I mean, they got stores everywhere now.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think they started as Caveman. I think Caveman got bought out by them. But anyway, we went to Caveman, and they had a reasonable selection of used video games, including 4 or 5 Turbografx 16 titles. Was it? I don't.
It was more than that. So this is where my memory gets apocryphal. I'm going to toss out you what I remember, and let's see if it's at all how they line up, because I think I remember this wrong, but I love my version of the story. So I remember going in and bringing some stuff in to trade, and I believe I brought in NES games. And I remember them saying, what do you want to trade for? Or me saying, I was offering up what I'm going to trade for. I was proud. I just got a Turbografx. I was ready to
you were high rolling. Yeah.
I had not played it yet. I hadn't played it yet. And this is what I recall. What I had brought in to trade, the gentleman saying, you want those? The Turbografx games? Him saying, yeah, you give me these, I'll just give you all those. And we cleaned them out. And I don't remember how we split them up, because you and I both walked away, right?
Yeah.
I didn't get all of them, you didn't get all of them. We walked away with some good games.
We did. And I remember that part of it, but I don't remember there being that many. I think
there was like 9.
Maybe. So maybe we split it to 4 or 5.
Yeah. As I can here's some that I remember us having. In Pac-Land.
Yep.
I'm going to give my impressions of the games, too, while we do this.
Sure.
Pac-Land.
Yeah.
I loved it.
I did
Simple.
Too.
No depth.
I still love that game.
It's a fun game, yes. Fun game, colorful, very pretty.
Oh, it looks great on
Turbografx.
Yeah,
it does. It looks like, it kind of looks like, in terms of its color and its pop, it looks like Super Mario World a little bit to me. It nowhere near has that level of gameplay depth. Mm-hmm. It's a very simple game. And I'm afraid Pac-Man maybe had encephalitis or something. His head was quite swollen in the game. The Jack-in-the-Box character.
And I didn't realize this at the time, but they took great pains to mimic the arcade controls on the Turbografx. Because I don't know if you remember this, but the default setting is the A button moves you left, the B button moves you right, and the up button jumps, which is how the arcade was set up. The arcade does not have a joystick.
You know what? I'd never played it in the arcade.
Okay, yeah. And then there was a control option B on Turbografx where the D-pad moved them and the buttons jumped.
Yeah.
Everybody used it. Exactly. Yeah. But I love the fact that they took that time to do that.
Yep. So we had that, right?
Yes, we did.
And I don't remember who got what, right? So we can kind of...
Well, and we'd rotate.
We did.
Yeah.
That's how we handled like everything that you owned and that I would borrow. hopefully return. So we had that. Then Legendary Axe.
Yes, excellent game.
Excellent game. A very good game. Don't like the second one very much.
No.
But that first one was a wonderful game.
Yeah.
We had Monster's Curse, right? Dragon's Curse. Dragon's Curse, which was Wonder Boy 3 Monster World, right?
But we didn't know that at the time.
We didn't know that at the time.
We were just like, Dragon's Curse, this game is amazing.
I'll take it, right?
Yes.
We were thinking that before we even played it. This is the game. No idea.
Because, and this is important, Hue cards don't have graphics on them. They're just the title of the game.
Yes.
And 90% of those that we got from Caveman did not have the box with them.
Nope.
So we're just like, Dragon's Curse, wonder what that's going to be. And that, I mean, like that kind of a relationship with a game does not exist.
It does not.
Anywhere else.
Splatterhouse.
Did we have Splatterhouse?
Yes, we did.
Wow, I don't remember.
I think I may have gotten that one.
Yeah.
And it's a fine game. You know what?
Well,
it's okay.
That's the gold standard of Turbografx in most people's minds.
Yeah. No, well, I tell you, it's an attractive.
Yeah.
Well, no, it's a hideously ugly game, but the graphics are good,
Yes,
right?
yes.
It's got the polish that it looks like a 16-bit game.
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
No, it's just an okay game, you know. And then there was a one shooter, and I think you were like, it was like Section Z for the Nintendo, if you remember that game.
So you're thinking of Sidearms.
Sidearms.
Yes. Which is still probably my favorite shooter of all time.
It was a good game.
Yeah.
And there, I'm thinking there were more, but I'm struggling to remember what they were.
So I remember we had one CD game that was Valis 3.
Yes, of course we didn't have CD.
But in our minds, it was just days until we'd get one.
Right, there's going to go on sale.
But we never got the CD, so poor Valis. And now that game is probably like a $500 game.
I'm sure that it is.
But anyway, so not only did we have this brand new system, this brand new world opening up to us, but then we had like this potential of someday we'll get to play this CD game.
Right.
Which is just hilarious to me. Ninja Spirit
is one very good game, yes.
Which is a very good game. Excellent game.
That's one where you have the Shadow Ninja with you,
yes.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, and as you get
because
power
there's an NES version of that as well, right? Or
there's a Game Boy version.
Okay.
I don't know if that was an NES version or not.
All right.
But strangely enough, there's a Game Boy version that plays pretty dang good for a Game Boy. I'm trying to think if there's any other ones I remember us having.
Yeah, maybe we didn't have as many as I thought. But, I mean, at the time, it was like...
It was,
we started out, new system, and we got a load of games.
And we had, like 7 or 8 games, which was unheard of.
We had Keith Courage, and we got them for very little because they just wanted to get rid of them at the Caveman. They were like, nobody buys these, and just take them.
And we had a blast with that system.
Oh, we did.
And the downfall of that system for us, or at least for me, was that from that initial day, we could never find another game.
It's not like now, right? Where if I wanted a game, you go on eBay and you buy it and you get it, right? Or Amazon or even, what are the local used games stores? There were only a handful of them at the time, and they were not trading in Turbografx games. I mean, the place that had the best selection just dumped their inventory on us, right? So, we didn't get... I'm trying to remember if you and I ever bought any other Turbografx games after that.
I don't recall doing so.
I don't either.
Yeah.
But man, and then we got home and we had these incredible 16-bit systems.
Yeah.
It was this new experience. And to this day, I still love just, sort of the unboxing setting up.
Yeah.
That is as fun to me as playing these games. I'm setting up an emulation machine right now, a computer to do emulating games, and I am having a blast just getting it configured.
Yeah.
I am purposely taking the long road because I enjoy it so much. In tweaking, and I'm not going to play a game until everything's perfect,
right? Because
the journey is just as important as the destination. And I'm going to squeeze every bit of enjoyment out of it. And I remember getting it home and setting it up, and setting it up through RF, and if we could have, we would have set it up through component cables.
But for Turbografx, you had to buy an extra thing to plug into the back to get composite and component out of it. Funny.
Oh man. But yeah, we got and I don't remember how long we had it. I've always been one of those people who tries stuff for a while and then burns out too quickly, gets rid of it, and then regrets it. And I for the life of me, been trying to remember how I disconnected from the Turbografx situation.
You know, I in my show notes I wrote that too. I can't remember why I got rid of it. I dearly wish I never had. But it was some new shiny. You know, maybe that was my gateway to a Super Nintendo. I can't remember. I can't remember
Yeah,
why I got
you
rid of
did
it.
go to a Super Nintendo shortly after. I never owned a Super Nintendo as a kid.
Really?
Nope, I did not.
Just use mine.
I just used yours. But yeah, what? But I wish I could remember what we did, because how would we have sold it?
That's a good
Right?
question.
Like, there was no Craigslist, no eBay.
No.
In the video game stores were not taking
Because
these.
Caveman would not have wanted it.
Would
back.
not have wanted it, and yeah, I don't know. I mean, obviously we did get rid of it.
Was Game Exchange a thing then, or was that later?
I think that was later. I think that was a few years off.
Yeah, I don't know.
Did we happen to did a mutual acquaintance of ours, a certain young man, I don't want to say his name because he's still around,
Sure.
whose mom loved Dr. Mario.
I know who you're talking about.
Did he buy one of our systems from us?
I don't think so. Because I think he was smarter in the sense of, like, if I'm going to invest money, I'm going to invest money in my NES.
Right, and knowing that he was going to be locked in and
Yeah.
wouldn't be able to play, buy new games.
So no, I don't think that's where it went. That's a great mystery, but
is.
I think we can both agree it never should have happened.
We should have kept
You
him.
should have kept them. I feel that way about 90% of the stuff I owned as a child. I wish I'd kept it.
Did it come with one controller or two? I mean, obviously, we had two
Came
controllers.
with one
because we
controller,
both- yeah.
and the system default configuration can only have one controller. You
You
had to buy
that's right.
the Turbo Tap.
The Turbo Tap, that's right, which we did not have.
No, we couldn't find it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we never got to experience any of this two-player, but we rotated the games. Man, and it was a great collection of games because you had a shooter, you had an action game, it's several action games, and then you had Dragon's Quest, which I'm going to call a light RPG.
It's a lighter. It's an adventure RPG.
Yeah,
very
and-
much along the lines of like Castlevania Simon's Quest or Legend or Zelda Link's Adventure, the second Zelda
Second one, yep.
for the NES. So that game deserves special mention. That game
Oh, it's outstanding.
was awesome. I played it all the way through without a Game Genie because that didn't exist, or Action Replay, and what a fun game. And for those of you who want to play it, you can experience it now as Wonder Boy 3 Wonder Boy Monster World.
Wonder Boy and the Dragon's Trap.
Wonder Boy and the Dragon's Trap, which is available on the Nintendo Switch.
It's available on everything.
Is it? It's
Yeah.
right. It is available on everything. Is
so-
it available on the PlayStation?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. But yeah, you can. I think it's on. Is it on Game Pass on Xbox? I can't recall.
Probably.
But yeah, it's very reasonably priced on the Switch.
Well, it's an amazing game.
It is.
So, to backtrack a little bit, when we were playing it as Dragon's Curse, we didn't know that it was a port of a Wonder Boy
game. We had
And we just played it as this amazing adventure RPG game that honestly messed with my head in the way that it treated 2D space. Like, I'd never played a game that branched off into different areas the way that game does. And so for years of my life, I revered this game. And then only later as an adult found out that it was just a port of Wonder Boy 3. And then when .mu and Lizard Cube, I think is their name? Yes, Lizard Cube. When they did the remake of it for Switch initially, and then it rolled out to everything else, beautiful job. And the Turbografx version used to be my favorite version of the game. Now there's unless you're just nostalgic and you want to see it, there's no sense to play it. The remake is superior in every way, and it is a phenomenal game, and it holds up today every bit as much. It's on my top 10 list of favorite games of all time. And I owe that to this Turbografx experience. Otherwise, I never would have known of this gem of a game that has stayed with me since that time, and you could say Splatterhouse has stayed with me since that time because you've always known about it, but it doesn't mean anything to me the way that Dragon's Curse means.
No, we
something.
invested time in that game, and really enjoyed every minute of it. It had a cool. The innovation in that was you mentioned that 2D space, but it had a 3D feel where you had to work in a 3D map so to speak. And but the big innovation that I enjoyed was you switched into these different animals,
Yeah.
and you used them to get to certain parts of the game. And it wasn't like this straightforward Mega Man, I used the ice gun to kill the fire guy. It was, I had to get through certain spaces where you could only be certain size and different weapons. And I can't even remember how all of it worked, but it was critical to you had to use wisely your transformations to make it through the game. Just depth that you would not expect from a Turbografx game or for any game of that time period, especially on a system where depth wasn't a big part of it. It was more twitchy shooters.
Absolutely.
But that game just rocked.
Yeah, it did, and it was a great memory. And I think the biggest thing I bring with me forward from Turbografx is an appreciation of the game less traveled. I think part of the big reason it failed is because people wanted the NES library. Those were games that people were comfortable with. Last Action Hero wasn't going to be ported to the Turbografx 16. That was on your NES. So if you wanted the big movie tie-in, that's where you went. And so having a Turbografx, playing as many of the games I could get my hands on, really made me appreciate, it's not the big seller of the week. It's not the hotly anticipated game. It's the little stuff, and it's kind of what exists today is the indie game spirit, that the Turbografx had, I think a lot of, I think. So that's what I keep with me in my heart from my original Turbografx. I rebought one as an adult and have a number of the games that we've listed, paid way more for them now than I did when we were getting a caveman, but that's my own fault. So,
do you own any Japanese games?
So, interestingly enough, I do not have a PC engine. I only have the Turbografx, and they're not compatible. The pinouts of the hue cards are exactly reverse between the two systems. They do make a converter, but they're kind of hard to come by. And so, no, I do not own any of the Japanese hue cards. The Analog, if you follow them, which is the maker of kind of boutique FPGA systems, they've promised a Turbografx 16 that does support both. And so if that does finally make it to market, that might get me on eBay investing in a lot of Japanese games. But I do not currently own any just American releases.
Well, that they're very expensive. I did just a little bit of eBay snooping. Right now a Turbografx in decent shape, run you about $200. With a CD in the 600, right? Especially to get one that's working.
Yeah, working is the trick.
Because all of these older systems, the capacitor issues, where Turbografx was one of the worst for capacitor rot, and then other things that could go on with capacitors, and then that could ruin an entire board, make it certainly difficult to repair. Expresses in the $500 range, which I was actually surprised. I thought they would be more expensive than that because of the rarity. But
a lot of them, if they're not modded, they're really not useful. And so the modded,
the backlight, and
the screen quality, all that kind of stuff. So to get one that's modded, you're looking at 500-ish, and that just kind of seems to be what the market bears for those.
In the duos, you could find some decent ones in the $300 to $400 range. I was surprised. I thought they would be more expensive, but I guess it's just maybe the collectability is less. I'm not really sure.
I don't know why that would be cheaper.
Yeah, I don't know, but I saw some decent deals on those. But it really, I'm not going to invest that kind of money. But I tell you what you can do. You can emulate, right?
Yes.
They're out there. The Mini is considered one of, if not in many, really respected reviews. Considered maybe the best of all the mini systems that have been released over the last several years. Nintendo started that wave, and then you had a bunch of the stuff from Atari, the flashbacks. The Turbografx one has 30 games. I can somewhere in there maybe. Maybe 20. I can't recall.
I don't remember, but it does include some CD games, which are extremely rare for America. We didn't see many of those, so that's fun that they included some of those.
It does not include Keith Courage, because of a copyright issue, because Keith Courage was borrowed from a Japanese anime,
Yeah.
but it wasn't directly borrowed, but it westernized it, but it kept enough that it was a copyright issue had to be left off, which to me is a bummer because that is an important game in the library. Certainly not the best, but a very important game.
On the bright side, it's dirt cheap. Nobody wants it.
That's true, but if you get the mini, you can't.
That's true. You can't plug in the
yeah,
IQ card.
it was the packing game, and it was very common, but a great game. But I do hear great things about the mini. Of course, emulation. You throw in like a Nintendo Bluetooth controller on the emulation. It works very well. Two button
and
direction pad.
something we should probably mention is Turbografx maybe is even still in the conversation because going back to the Wii Shop
Yes.
released Turbografx 16 games.
Yep.
And I know I had a Wii and was plugged into buying several NES and SNES titles, and that was my first toe dip back into retro gaming as an adult. And then lo and behold, Turbografx pops up one day, and I was like, oh my gosh, I remember a ton of these, and I wonder how much that kept it alive just enough in the consciousness of U.S. buyers that we're still talking about it today.
Would not be surprised to see it show up on the Nintendo Online,
Yeah.
the Switch Online service, as a part of their premium offering next to the Nintendo 64 and the Genesis. I think there's a library to mine there.
Yeah.
And I have that subscription, and I'd fire that up before I fired up the Genesis. To be sure, because those games are more unique and interesting.
Definitely. Long live the Turbografx.
Yeah, and it's also a great, for those of you who are not particularly interested in video game stuff, but do have an interest in business and innovation and the life cycle of products. There's a lot to be learned about mostly what not to do from a business standpoint in researching that. I learned some stuff that, not only just interesting trivia about the history of the system, but some interesting lessons about managing technology products. So
Definitely. And maybe your case doesn't matter as much as you think it does.
Maybe it does
delay
not.
for 2 years.
Nearly 2 years while they got that design right. Because they believed that Nintendo had, and I think there is an element of truth that they had experienced success in the States because of the redesign. And there's an element of truth to that.
Sure.
But it was not the killer feature. And
had they released in 86, 87, I think they would have had a stronger case. But by 89, video games was no longer a poison industry.
That's right.
It had turned around, and if they had just been like, PC Engine, here it is, I think they would have had greater success. I will give them credit. They nailed the electronic component look for the TurboGrafx 16.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
I mean, it's right in there with CD players of the era.
Yes, it looks like a Bose lifestyle
Yes,
system
it
from that
does.
era. It really
Yes, it does.
very attractive. The design language, all the way through the controllers and all that looked really cool. And the Hue cards were just such a neat, high tech looking product.
Definitely.
Yeah. So what is a Turbografx, and what does it mean to you? Well, maybe it means nothing, but it certainly means an awful lot to us, as
Yes.
you can hear.
Yes, it does. And I say I miss it. I have one, but it honestly does not get the dust knocked off of it very often. But, oh, well, good times. And, yeah, that's what this podcast is about.
That's right.
Good times.
Us talking about things that interest us, whether you like it or not, listener.
Deal with it.
Deal with it.
It's kind of a violent way to
It
end
is.
this episode.
I feel bad now.
We're sorry, listener.
We're sorry. Yeah. Please accept our apologies.
We'll see you next time.